right. Is someone coming in now?
Yeah.
People are arriving, so we'll give it a moment.
Carolyn and Amora.
Who is that?
Carolyn and Amora.
Oh, lovely. Come in.
We're just starting the meditation.
You're here for our private session.
Yay.
Except on Zoom, we're about our usual.
Oh, yes. Max senses love.
Okay.
Hello. Holly, Carolyn.
So glad you're here, honey.
Yeah, so glad.
Yeah. So we're just going to start with a 5-minute gathering and the inner space. On the breath, on the inhale, just fall into the spacious true nature that is the one I am, into the awake awareness where we are so at home. We are in love. We are knowing this experience as one. This is the experience of oneness. This is the experience of home, of connection, the source of everything that arises and appears as body minds and appears as circumstances and appears as objects. And so we are thrilled to be in this space, acknowledging the power of it, the presence of it, and the nature of it as the one I am. And so it is. Happy Independence Day yesterday. Just a few of us here in the room today. How many are there? I can't see them.
Sue and Deborah and Gio came in.
All right. Okay. Yeah. The what was arising here in our time of coming together was the idea that when two or more are gathered in my name, there I will be. And I believe that what was being pointed to, even though that's a quote I think from the New Testament from Jesus, what was being pointed to was our true name, which is awake awareness. When we gather with that acknowledgement, with that awareness that I am that, and we know ourselves as one, when two or more are gathered in my name, I will be there. The consciousness will be there as representing the oneness, because there are not two. And when we're here together, there are not six, or there are not 12. There is one. And that meditation space is where we start to fall into that. We fall into love. We fall into that oneness that is the true nature. And knowing ourselves is that we know that whatever we shift, whatever we thinking of ourselves as, in quotes, individuals, the work that we do applies across the board. And so we have this immense possibility of changing this reality. That's what we have. We can do that. We can do that as we clear the lie within ourselves, believing that it's just about us. We clear the frequency of fear, and that clears it in the whole. So the possibility of why we are longing to be free means everything to this reality. That longing is our directional indicator toward the contribution that we can make to creating heaven on earth. We know it in ourselves whenever we're free and clear of the limitation of the suffering, when we're free and clear of the limitation of an identity that was installed the way our group works on it early on. I'm not good enough, I don't matter. With that installation, we created an operating system and a distortion field that emerged from it that keeps showing us something about ourselves, as if we were the one, as if we were the only one, right? And we want to clear that up. And the reason that that's motivation is very high-minded is because if we do that work there, that influences everything. So our motivation is not just, I want to wake up, or I want to not suffer, or I, even though it's held that way, in its fulfillment, we contribute to a shift in reality. And that's the most fun you can have with your clothes on. So we start to lighten up into the love and into the connection, into the possibility that without that thought, we are there, which is what we experienced in our group here and online, in that spacious awake awareness. Anytime you get caught up in the apparent out here, you get magnetized into the external, and it feels like being up against something, or something's up against you, or there's suffering there. At any moment when that's happening, remind yourself that there is an underpinning, there is the awake awareness, there is the field out of which, maybe the quantum field, we could call it that. I have a very loose affiliation with science. It's the quantum field, it's the heart, it's whatever, but it's the source. And we know that. We know that in our own experience. And so when something starts to magnetize you into the external, which is a projection of fear, then you remind yourself that you know another truth, you know another reality, you are another reality. And it's like coming back. I think I may have said it last week, but one of my favorite instructions from Nisargadatta was back up, get behind, go back, right? And that's what he's pointing to, is like, get back behind this body-mind unit with its reality and know that it's arising in awake awareness. Our spirit, our soul is not in this body-mind unit. We are arising in the awake awareness that is true nature, along with all else. We're not separated from anything there. And so as we start to realize that it's only with that thought that I get pulled into the frequency of fear, and we start to be willing to not go there, and perhaps the motivation for not going there can be the realization that even if you feel like I'm not good enough and I don't deserve any better, if you can lift yourself up out of that, it's like you're lifting up all of creation. It's an amazing reality that we live in, that we have access to shifting, changing, enlightening by doing our own inner work, our own inner awareness of what's limiting, what's creating suffering, and seeing it, shining the light on that. And with that light shining on that, realities change. I don't remember thinking that was anything I've said so far was what I was going to talk about today. I don't know. The assemblage, what shows up in awake awareness, I believe we do not have language for it. We point to human values and what we want to experience, like freedom and peace and love, and believe that that's the language of awake awareness. But we created suffering, fear, and individuality through language. And so our language cannot apply at that level of reality, of consciousness, awake awareness, all that is. And so it has qualities, but we know them by going there. We can't name them. We can point to them with our language that points to, but our language, every single word we say implies an opposite. And so language is configured to the experience of duality. It created duality experientially and through expression of it. And so as we begin to, in that spaciousness, I suspect that all of us, to a varying greater or lesser degree, had an experience of the quality of that awake awareness, a kind of knowing about it. And when I've talked about it's in this spaciousness that we all are experiencing exactly the same thing, and I've put language to it or words to it, they're always just a pointer. They're always going to be a limitation. The reality of what that is can only be experienced. It cannot be named. And when it is named, it's not true, but it is a pointer. And so we talk about freedom and connection and love and oneness, because that is the nature of what we are able to grok when we have dropped the mind, when we've dropped the fear and allowed ourselves to fall into the love that is awake awareness. And so we are experiencing it. We can't name it accurately. We can, as I said, point to it. And as we are, each one of us, addressing, coming towards whatever is the limitation within our own, what we think of as our own awake awareness, or our own awareness, our own limited identity infused mind. When we come to that, we can see from the perspective of our true nature, if you can see it, you're not it. You can see that the objects that populate this inner mind experience, not our collective awake awareness, but our idea of our own inner mind, that what populates there has everything to do with resistance and to the woundedness and to our limited personal identity. And so then we have that reality, and it tends to be experienced as prior to our what's going on. It's always, in other words, it's experienced as what's always arising, whereas our meditation state, our awake awareness is the place we go to. It's where we relax into, we dissolve into it. So now what we want is for us to see this populated, I'm not good enough, they shouldn't have done that to me, I don't like it when I have to be on the phone for 18 hours and talk to a person who can't speak English. All of the problems and kinds of dramas of this external life in this projected reality. Remember, it's projected through the distortion field of our woundedness, of our wound of separation, which is collective, and then our specific version of that. And so we want to see from our true nature, which is awake awareness, we want to see what is going on in the projected distortion field. And in that experience, there are stages here that we go through, but in that experience, we are now not had by it. It's like what's happening. In that experience, it's like I am here and it's there, it's an object. Anything that shows up as an object can be discreated. It requires your attention, the label you've put on it, and your belief in it for it to persist. So in this field of in this distortion field of our woundedness, the work that we're doing is to use the awareness that what we're seeing cannot be who we are being. Who we are is the awareness that's seeing this limitation, looking like, I can't do that, I'm not good enough, I don't matter. That when you can see anything, then you're not it, right? It's a creation. It requires both your belief in it and your attention. And your attention is usually through a reaction to it. That's a very strong kind of attention, resistance. But if you can see it, it can fall away. I am here and that is there. And so we begin to move all of the furniture out of the personal awareness. And when all of that's gone, because it was created by the impediment of our self-judgment to our true nature, when all of that's gone, we fall into that spacious awake awareness that we know during our meditation time together. So the distinction is between what you have as an identity, as a limitation, as a belief, and who you are as the awareness in which that arises. And when that awareness is known as what is, and the objects that are moving through it are neither resisted nor attached to, then you're living in the field. You're living in the field of your true nature. You're living into and out of and supported by and informed by awake awareness. And that's what all of us here on the Zoom and in this room, that's what we have been moving toward. We turned, and whatever point in our lives, we turned toward, there's got to be something different. There's got to be something besides suffering. There's got to be something besides the limitation that I experience as my own mind and my own reality. And with that turning, we opened ourselves to this, to being in a Sangha like this, to being reflecting towards and off of each other, the reality of the connection and the love that we are.
So Polly, I love that idyllic state you just described.
Do you?
I do.
I recommend
and
it.
I've got to tell you though, I've been dancing inside of Max's distortion field lately.
Mhm.
He's not in a good feeling place. And I
Mm.
work all day long trying to stay in a good feeling place. And then when he's not, it just, I'm sure we've all been there. You just drop down with him. And no pep. I even said to him today, what would Polly say? Because he's losing his sight. And every day it's harder. And he said, well, she's just a non-person. She's not a
She doesn't count.
She doesn't count.
We don't care what she
She's a
thinks.
non-person.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, the whole thing, what you're experiencing, and I'm not trying to diminish your expression and your sharing of that, but is the resistance to it. It's a very interesting dynamic that happens in the worst circumstances is to give up resistance to it, the way in which that shifts it. And it's a very high bar with something like losing your eyesight or like losing your mind, or although that's probably not a bad thing, but it's like we have these things in place that we think are better than or preferred. And when it's not like that, then we come like this. And this is what we're dealing with,
fix it.
not this.
Right.
We're dealing with the resistance. And so the allowing, and it's like, the only way we can allow something that carries with it all of the story of aging, losing the eyesight, losing your mind, the only way that we can allow it is we have to undo what we've been programmed to believe. We have to see through the idea that it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
And that's the way that it relaxes. It's like, this is it. Now, the caveat with that is when we say this is it, that can be a spiritual bypass, but the implication is this is it, and I don't know what it is, right? And it's just that, and it doesn't mean anything. It's just what's happening. It's the freedom in that shift in consciousness, whenever we can go there, the freedom of that, the connection of that can begin to recreate the world, the reality. You can't do it to get it. But when you do it, because it shifts the frequency of resistance, then things can start to move a bit. They're not so held in place.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. That makes total sense.
yeah.
Colin,
And
what
it's
you
a high
said just
bar.
before,
Sorry?
if you can see it, it's not you.
That's right.
Wouldn't it be applying that to any physical ailment as well?
Absolutely. But when it feels like you, because you've been seeing your whole life,
Right.
you've been reading your whole life, and so it's that's the giving up of resistance, is to observe it, to see it. And in this case, when there's an apparent other that you feel responsible to and for, then it's but it is an object. Anything with the body mind is an object. And so that does apply, Sue, for sure, that you're observing that, you're seeing it. It can seem cavalier to the one who's suffering with it that you say, oh, I can see that, so it's just an object.
Right, of course.
But for oneself, I can not see it. That's the condition. Yeah.
Right.
It means nothing about true nature. It's just what's happening. It's like part of the movie. And so some of that ability to make a small incremental detachment at the same time you're just with whatever is without resistance. It's a very high bar, Maura, bless your heart.
It was really sweet though. He said, let's listen to RJ spin up
Good.
on the divinity of detachment. So
Yeah.
I think we'll do that.
Wow.
Good.
That's great. That'll be helpful.
I think so.
Yeah.
But what
that's
else
a good
can we
one.
do but detach, right?
That's right.
And see what's next.
Well, typically what we do is that it's like, and I always make the analogy of it's like seeing a wreck on the road and getting out and throwing yourself into the wreckage instead of calling 911. Typically, we're just throwing ourselves into the suffering, but you're not doing that, and Max is not doing that totally. And so there's an opening,
Exactly.
and in that opening, you come home.
Yeah. I just don't want him to get down so far that he can't get up again, It's tricky.
Well, down may not be that bad, honey. It's a very slippery slope to realize the kind of prejudice we have about conditions.
Mm.
Mhm.
Down is the new up.
That's right.
Down is the new one. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Maura.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So if anyone else on Zoom or in the room has a question or a thought, go ahead and raise your hand. If you're on Zoom, I'll spotlight you with Polly. Yeah, go ahead.
I had just an observation to make about the way in which the awake awareness has a background. It kind of gets objectified and then recedes into the background, and then instantaneously is background of the, like anytime you reify it or
Right.
or put it in language, it becomes another object in the field of all the objects, right? In
Yeah.
a certain sense, it falls from grace. And then as soon as you realize that's what's happening, it's already slipped back into a kind of, so there's this kind of really continuous and in a way almost imperceptible oscillation or overturning or rolling of the awake awareness state into an object in the field. And then behind that is instantly created the actual awake awareness again, which hasn't yet to be put in language or noticed as something that your mind would define in linguistic terms like awake awareness or the one or our what do you say? Your phrase is our natural state?
I can't remember.
But
All that is, but the field.
all that is.
Yeah, the quantum field, basically. Yeah, I mean, it's very, it is, the mind is going to do exactly what you described on every hand. It will.
Mhm.
But there's an underlying, once you've seen through your own woundedness, and that has cleared the distortion field, there's an underlying arising all the time of the experience of the one I am. And then it can't be an object, and it can't be a condition. It's just all that is. I am that. But not until you've cleared a lot of the distortion field is that available. The
Mhm.
way to that is like the work we were talking about with Amora, like seeing. It's like anytime we turn like this and come home, right? And then finally, you never leave. You just never leave home.
Mhm.
That's it. Yeah. But Jude, it does exactly what you pointed to. It's created as an object. It becomes an object. That's what the mind does. And the mind's been running the show for millennia, and it wants to continue. And it's very compelling. It's convincing. It's like it'll show you something in the external and say, but what about that? Like a health issue, like or a money issue, or a relationship issue. But the mind is always going to be doing that until you've just dropped out of it. You just, like Nisargadatta says, you've gotten back, you've backed up, and in that backing up, you have this, and everything arises there. But the mind is not running that show. When you back out of the identity of the distortion field, the mind is not running that show, and you are present as awake awareness, and in that presence, this reality arises. Yeah. But until then, the mind is a slippery slope, and it can get hold of by the cojones. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thanks, honey.
Thank you.
So Lindsay has a question.
Yeah, thank you. So you kind of started to touch on this, but the money issue,
Mhm.
like, I don't even know how to phrase the question.
That pretty much says it all. The money.
Right. So to not have resistance about it, but yet you're seeking to create it or have an interaction to attain it. So talk about how to flow through that. Because I understand the resistance part, but then it is obviously something it's the same concept. If you were hungry and you were looking for food, like I love what you said, the prejudice that we come to things that it should be a certain way. So amazing. Your bank account looks like that, like accepting that it is that, but then not ending up underneath a bridge.
Well, yeah. Happy under the bridge, that's the next one. Yeah, the whole thing is the conditioning, the programming, we have to be very kind to ourselves regarding this issue because of the powerful conditioning and programming that we've all been subjected to in this reality, right? Even if we go back to the story of the Anunnaki coming in and genetically engineering us so that we would mine for gold, right? And that we have this like a genetic the tendency to want to get the gold because that's how we survived, we became the slaves. That's an old story from Zachariah Sitchin. But the thing about it is to be kind to ourselves because of all of what we've been subjected to. We've been subjected to in regard to this money issue. The thing about it is, no matter what conditioning there's been, no matter what, how we deal with it at the horizontal level, the thing about it is that this reality is a frequency reality. That's fundamental. And as we internalize that truth and that reality, and we start to be with, it's like you were saying, so you look at the bank statement, it's like, wow, either that's a lot of money or that's not going to work. Right? But you're caught up in response reaction to that. Typically, what that's going to evoke is a frequency of fear or concern, or it's going to be, in other words, reaction response to the money game. However, I started to say, however it's playing you, is going to create a person. And so as we start to remind ourselves that the frequency I'm living in, and you can't fake frequency, I mean, you can't fool Mother Nature. It's the old way of saying that, but you can't fake like through even a gratitude practice, through an affirmation, a vision board practice. You can't make the quantum field believe that you are not worried.
Wish that we could.
So I wish we could, but we are it. And so the reality of what we're experiencing energetically is the information into the field. So it's a frequency issue. When you are, the more that you free yourself up from the idea of cause and effect at the level of money, and oftentimes that freedom will begin to happen even as you are dealing with a money issue, right? In other words, you're having to make choices about, say, what bills to pay or whatever. To the degree that you can do that without it being personal, then that frequency is freed up a bit, right? If you go into the mind's fear-based concern about what it means, then you're going to be caught in a low frequency of fear. Byron Katie says, if you want to be in terror, get a future. Yeah. So that often applies to the money issue. It's like you can do whatever you need to do without it meaning anything about you. At least that is the direction I would suggest that you go in, because what you're wanting to do is to come out of where you've been magnetized into the frequency of fear, and the money's been the vehicle for that.
Thank you.
That makes sense to you? A little?
Yep.
Yeah. I once said to people that are actually in this room that when you sit down to pay your bills and do your accounting, just pretend you're doing it for me. It won't be so personal then. Pay my bills, give the money away, collect the money, do whatever, right? But get the person out of it.
Did you say you're gonna pay
Gio thinks I'm gonna pay his bill. I know, yeah. People are always mishearing what I say.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, things become sticky when they're personal. And most things are personal because we've created them. You know, that old analogy I make, you can have a shitty ass ugly baby, but it's yours. It's like you can have a problem that seems like it's insurmountable and it's like untenable, and you don't understand how you got that, but you're with your resistance, you're still connected to it, you're still hanging on to it. Resistance and attachment. Resistance is the strongest kind of attention, but attachment will tend to do the same thing. Being attached to, let's say, your extra $2 billion in the bank.
So Polly, I watched you around money.
Mm.
Other people may not have watched this as closely and seen the ease and the freedom you have with it, which is astonishing and kind of mind-blowing. And how everything works out regardless of what you spend, or there's just no hoarding of any money that I can see at all. And a generosity and an ease that I think is really hard to fathom, really.
Well, the only way you have that is if you don't believe that money is the cause of your experience. You get freed up as you see through, because in this collective programming, in this indoctrination, it's been equated with well-being. You know, it's money, health, and relationship, as I said. But the whole thing with the money is that if you see that as cause in the matter of your experience, the attachment is going to be automatic. But if you see it as just what's moving, or now there's some there, now there isn't, now there's whatever, then it just doesn't imply something that should be different than it is. If you see it as cause in the matter, then there'll always be the concern about how much there is or how little there is, and what you should do with it, or I mean, the attention gets pulled towards it like it does with anything, especially the areas, the arenas of conditioning, like money, relationship, and the God games. There's that one. But the freedom around money is to allow, like everything else, allowing, and to notice when you have an impediment within you regarding if you're paying bills and it feels scary, or if you're looking into the future. What are you doing looking into the future, right? It doesn't mean that you might not have a 401k that's going to support you in the future. At least that's its purpose, right? We'll see.
So where does being like wise or smart, get these gallery views? There you go. Where does being wise or smart about money come in?
Well, it's not going to, that's the thing about, see, the mind, the rational analytic mind wants you to believe that that's where the best conclusions are. What were you calling it?
Wise or smart?
Wise. That's where wise and smart comes from, rational analytic. But the reality is that it comes from our true nature, which is the heart. And that has nothing to do with being compliant or soft or a pushover or anything like that. There's actually so much clarity there. So you can't, if you're depending on the rational analytic, which is where this kind of consideration has always been addressed, then there's going to be limitation there. So you do the best you can there, and then you open up into what is the greater possibility. Do the best you can with the rational analytic, like it's going to look like the accounting or the bill paying, and then allow that your frequency is at the frequency of connection and possibility, and not so dependent on what you just did. In other words, your attention's not going to be magnetized into the fear or the relief or anything. It's just that.
Okay, so I'm thinking about being on my own behalf. I think I've been conditioned to believe being on my own behalf is being grounded in the rational analytic,
That's right.
right? So you're saying that like tie your camel and pray to Allah kind of like
Yeah.
you're gonna tie your camel, you're gonna look at your rational analytic, you're gonna look at that, but there's something, and this is the piece I watched with you, the magic happens in the possibility realm. And to be on our own behalf, to be on my own behalf. In the possibility realm.
Right. If you're doing the rational analytic as an equation with what this needs to happen, that needs to happen, and you're not caught in fear, and you're not projecting a fear-based future out of this rational analytic thing, then you are already on your own behalf in the larger sense of things. So it's again, in a way, it goes to that detachment issue, right? You're just handling it. You're doing what's there. That clears you in terms of the field. And if when you're doing this rational analytic, you have to tell yourself the truth about where you're being constricted, where you're being, where you're suffering, where you're feeling a reaction or a limitation, that this means something. It's like if you were putting the dishes in the dish drainer or the silverware in the drawer, you're just doing it. It's doing it, right? But if it means something about your experience, it doesn't mean anything about your experience. Your experience is up to who you are being to yourself. And this work that we're doing on the early identity, that distortion field, that's what handles that. Then as we go towards something like the money, something like the relationship, we get as clear as we can get, and we, on the breath, allow, open, allow the field. We've kept the quantum field from being on our own side because of our resistance to what shows up, like our budget, like our relationship, like the apparent external reality, which is a projection, so you don't get to change it out there. It was created back then, now it's being projected out there. So it's all about who am I being right now with this being money in this case.
Thank you.
Thank you, honey. Yeah,
Something got clear there I hadn't seen before.
good. Where are we?
About 15 minutes.
All right, topics, concerns. Somebody else talk.
Carolyn has her hand up.
As usual, I'm struggling with how to articulate the thoughts. So on a different, the same topic, but a different version. Okay, how do I do this? I'm really struggling, I'm having a blank now. But the dichotomy between, okay, I'll just put it in the real personal terms. As you know, I've always been very cerebral and use the rational analytics a lot. And I feel like I get what we're talking about and I get what we've worked on together. But how do I say this? Some of my adaptive behavior, a lot of my adaptive behavior forever has been not to be somewhat passive and to allow people to do their thing without reacting, without voicing anger or disappointment or
preference even.
or preferences. Yeah, that's been the thing. So when you were so beautifully talking very early on about being in the moment and being and not having really struggling with this, but not. It's almost like this, the center, the core of your work I'm struggling with because it feels like my adaptive behavior was always to be somewhat non-interventionist with people or non-judgmental or something. And that has led to a lot of issues and problems and suffering for me. And so when we're talking, when you were talking about, I couldn't hear because I have a hearing issue. I couldn't hear. Was it about your husband?
Yeah.
Yeah. I got the general drift of it, and I have some people in my life that might be similar. But the non-responsiveness, the neutrality, the being in the moment, the being non-judgmental, it's somehow, do you know what I'm struggling to get to? It feels like it's the same thing. It's not.
It would
I-
seem so.
What?
It would seem
Yeah,
so,
it's
right?
not the same thing.
No, it's
I
not.
know it's not the same thing. I mean, I get it when you're speaking of it, but as you were developing it with Amar, I was thinking, yeah, but that's kind of what I've done my whole life. And that's been really an adaptive behavior and really an inappropriate one and a negative one for me to say, oh, well, that's just, I'll just be real, because you know the stories. That's Uncle Harry, he can't hear, that's okay, that's fine, even though it's driving me crazy,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
I understand. I mean, when I was a little kid, one of my favorite things I read about Indians was if you walk in their moccasins for 1 mile, you'd know how it was. So my response to anybody was, no problem, they're great, or not they're great, but
They're doing the best they can.
they're, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at is the issue about spontaneity and responding without having it through a lens or through an interpretation or a critique, but on the other hand, being true to oneself and being able to be spontaneous, because I don't feel any sense of authority about being spontaneous, because obviously the world is bigger than I know, and everybody's got their issues, and I shouldn't react. And do you know what I'm struggling
Right, yeah.
to say?
Yeah, and well, what you're describing is your adaptive behavior that came out of your idea of who you are.
Right.
In other words, your woundedness.
Right.
Right. And in the distortion field that would show up with that input, that conclusion about yourself, and then the adaptive behaviors that handled it, then that's the reality. But the spontaneity is not the direction we want to go, but authenticity is. And the authenticity depends on what we have worked on, that you've done some amazing work on, Carolyn. The authenticity depends on seeing what you believed about yourself, that even if you can't dissemble or dissolve that belief, you understand how it's showing up in your world, right? And from there, you can, so when we're talking about detachment, we're not talking about not knowing what's happening, seeing what's happening, even maybe understanding it at the most fundamental cause and effect level. But also, how am I most effective for myself and for this apparent other? So it's a meditation of sorts, really. It's a coming home. Yeah, and it's absolutely confusing at the horizontal level of the practical way of dealing with issues with apparent others. But the issue is always with ourselves. And the issue is always the woundedness. And when that's gone, then clarity comes. It's William Blake's cleanse the doors of perception. That's what we're doing with the work of seeing through the conclusion, the early wounding conclusion, and the distortion field that it's created. It will fall away because it's made up out of something. This is how powerful we are as creators. We had a belief, a thought about ourselves, and then we have the reality that matches that. Now, because this reality that we're playing in is a duality, the confusion comes because we will get the good end of the stick sometimes out of our adaptive behavior. So if I'm really a good girl in school and everything, I get the kudos for that, or the grades, or the approbation. But then on the playground, everybody's making fun of me and they hate me. You see, I mean, it's played out in a polarity, which is what gets to be confusing for the person, which without this person identity, which is a fear-based filament of sorts, you wouldn't incarnate into this reality. So it is the polarity that creates confusion. But that's where we're working. We want to go meta to that. We want to go, if that's the baseline on the triangle, we want to go to the apex, and from that place, see the full expression of that wound. I don't matter, I'm not good enough. And the way we play it out to try to get something, approbation or attention, and how we believe it actually works when we are put down or dismissed or we are acted unkindly towards. So it's that opening. We're just opening out of this. There are no solutions at the level of the problem. And that's why all of us who have been on this path in this lifetime, that's why we're going about the shift in perception, because the shift in perception changes the frequency, and that frequency redreams this reality, a new frequency. It's the new heaven and the new earth, and it happens in one's body and in the reality that shows up. Thank you, Karen. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you. Anyone else for the last 5 minutes here? Questions, thoughts?
Corrections,
Interventions.
interventions, welcome.
Looks like Katie Lewis might be saying something. Coming in.
I'm coming in.
Okay.
Incoming.
I'm incoming. I
Okay.
just have to be a little quiet.
Is Amelie asleep?
No, it just involves her, so I don't want her to hear so much.
Okay.
So
She's all ears.
she's all ears. So we had this amazing thing happen where she got invited to be at this wonderful school. And the school is wonderful and welcoming, and it just feels like amazing. And she hasn't started there, but it's like everything is welcoming about it. And then we have to do all these vaccines in order to get in for her to start. And we wouldn't, if we did them all, we wouldn't be able to get them done in time. So it's presented this issue of I've got my back against the wall, and shit, what am I gonna do? And I realize, like, I'm thinking that the other side doesn't have any, like, I can't communicate with the other side. That's my belief, because then it would show that we won't be able to get all the vaccines done.
The other side is, are you pointing to the
The
administration?
school, yeah,
School,
the
yeah.
administration. So it's like, I don't know how
Mhm.
open they are to us having a plan and following it through, or whether they all have to be there up front and they're very rigid about it,
Mhm.
or what. And so it's this dilemma
Mhm.
that calls my attention.
Mhm.
And then and so I've been, like, there's moments when I go like, it's all going to work out. It's going to figure itself out. And then there's other moments where I'm like, we have to do something to figure it out. And how, it just feels like another manifestation of worry,
Mhm.
another topic of worry to draw me in to my pattern of worrying about those in my life.
Right, yeah. Yeah, the powers that be have a kind of, they pop up and then weigh down on us at different times. My question to you first would be, Are you up for Amelie having the series of vaccinations that are required?
You know, we've had some of
Yeah,
them,
yeah. Mhm.
and it's not my first desire, but she wants to go to this school so badly.
Mhm.
And it would be heartbreaking for her, from my perspective, to say we're not going.
Mhm.
And the other option here is why, I mean, she's kind of led this whole journey to this new school herself.
Uh-huh.
So she's a full yes, and the school's just a yes. And then there's this. And so I could go through with, you know, all the vaccines, but even if we went through them, we wouldn't accomplish them by the date of school starting.
Mhm. So you haven't interfaced with the school about this?
No, because
Yeah, I get it.
so I'm like, okay, so worry, here's worry.
Right.
And I have, you know, like, is it possible that the world's a loving, welcoming place? Even so.
Yeah. When you go for Amelie to start the school year, is that when you have to provide those immunization records?
Yeah.
Doesn't it make sense to you, sweetheart, to tell the school where you are with it and that you're in process?
Yes, it does.
It might be that they would have a preference about which ones that you're in a timely way of
Okay.
having her receive. They may have a preference about that.
See, this is where I want to believe that they might be open to communication, and where my mind goes to, what if they don't let us go?
Right. Well, the mind is going to go into the distortion field of the fear, of the piece that you are instinctively moving towards is the communication, right?
Yeah.
And then the fear is holding you back. So it's like to see what that fear is, because that I want you to do the 6 steps to freedom on that reaction fear about them not letting her in, what that feels like in you. Okay. You can get in touch with me if you want me to facilitate that. But if you clear up that fear, then your communication with the school is going to be a whole lot more efficacious for both you and the school and Amelie. Yeah. Are you
Yeah.
there?
I'm
Yeah,
still there. Yeah.
I know, sweetheart. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like it feels like the same feeling quality as when my dad was gonna.
I know. Exactly. It feels like helplessness and futility and being caught in a kind of inevitability that you don't have any input into, but you do have input, and you do it within your own distortion field. And then from there, what arises will be much clearer. And it may still be, and probably still be scary, but it will be much more clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Polly.
Thank you, sweetheart.
I'll give you a call.
Okay, thank you, Katie. We're
Okay.
gonna, thank you, everyone. We're gonna make a shift in the meditation. Before we do, I want to remind everyone that Polly's family will be visiting next week. We're celebrating her 84th birthday, which is on Friday. And so we will not have any groups next week. There won't be group on Wednesday next week, but we will continue the following Wednesday. So we'll go into meditation now. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to go, and look forward to seeing you when we return.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, Mom, Polly.